me talk about Amnesty International before, and I've, at my own expense, run off a letter writing campaign. And what this is it's an opportunity for anyone that wants to write letters on the behalf of imprisoned people that are prisoners of conscience. And there's 3 letters here, and they're just simple letters. All you have to do is write and say, I'm writing on the behalf of so-and-so. All the information really that you need is right here. And if you want to, great, and if you don't, then that's your choice, you know. And I just thought that since a lot of people can't come to the meetings that we've been trying to coordinate on the campus, I'd bring it to you.
Well, the important thing is that the more we understand, the greater our obligations. And therefore we have to assume an active role to bring about a situation where escalate violence, genocide, or any sort of civil activities. And I think that's exceedingly important for us to realize that knowledge obligates. I'd like to say a few things, just very few things indeed. The position papers are due now, the second position paper, for sociology and sociology accreditation credit. Last time I received some papers which most of these papers are of very high quality, I'm happy to say, and I can return them to you. Those of you who gave me the papers can have them back now, graded. And those who have not given them to me need to give them to me so that I can read it, because we are already late. Then there was a request to do a little bit, and maybe we can do it after the lecture, because that has precedent, about your impressions of Shoah. Maybe we can have a short discussion on that. I have not seen the whole thing, but a number of my colleagues have, and many of the students have, and I think we should discuss that. Also, I would like to discuss very briefly a letter, a correspondence I have with a chap called Sommer, who was played an important part in Kogon's book. Now, this Sommer is a person with whom I've had a correspondence for very many years, and just yesterday I received a letter from him, which, when we have a little bit more time, I'll share with you, because he wants to be viewed as a hangman and not as a murderer. And that's all in connection with Shoah and the relationship to Shoah, which we need to discuss. In terms of how the interviews were conducted and what it has revealed to us, which we may not have known before, and to what extent these things also are to be accepted as relatively objective and factual. Any question? Anything which needs to be discussed before we go into the lecture? Yes. Thank you. Yeah. It's called genocide, isn't it? That's what it is called, yes. 9 o'clock. 9 o'clock. Anything else in terms of problems with papers, assignments, questions? Okay, thank you. We have to hold on to this.
On behalf of the Alliance for the Study of the Holocaust, I'd like to welcome you here to today's lecture. My name is Barry Cohn, and I'm the Assistant Director for the Community Relations Council of Marin, Sonoma, and the Peninsula. The JCRC, as it's called, is a consensus-seeking organization for the Jewish community. It's comprised of about 50 national organizations and many of the local organizations, synagogues and so forth, which meet together to form consensus on various issues and concerns of the Jewish community. Today, excuse me, my pleasure to introduce today's lecture. You should know that on behalf of the Alliance is sponsoring today's lecture in collaboration with the Sonoma State University Holocaust Committee, and the lecture series has been going on since February 3rd and will continue for another 3 weeks. The next lecture is on May 5th. Will be a panel of survivors, and the title is After Surviving the Holocaust, Adjusting to Psychological, Sociological, and the Existential. The speakers will be Paul Benko, who is a professor of biology at Sonoma State University, David Benahamas from Salonika, Greece, and Gerald Rosenstein from Bensheim, Germany, and Dr. Michael Thaler from Poland, and is the president of the Holocaust Center of Northern California. Today's speaker, Martin Blaze, Professor Martin Blaze, grew up in New York. He was the son of immigrant parents, and he earned his Bachelor of Arts degree in English at Queens College, and upon graduating earned a scholarship to attend New York University, where he earned a master's degree and a doctorate in English. He is a strong believer of the public educational system, where he has spent the last 18 years teaching at various universities and colleges. For 7 years, he taught at the State University of New York in Buffalo, and for the last, I guess, 19, has been here at Sonoma State. His area of specialization is in 17th century English literature and literary criticism, modernism, and American Jewish writers. It is my privilege and honor to introduce to you Professor Martin Blaze.
Thank you. I have to fit this on. Before I begin, or I'd like to begin with a dedication to Primo Levi, Italian Jewish writer, who was a survivor of Auschwitz, and whose testimony in his work Survival in Auschwitz and the Reawakening, and subsequent works, taught us possibilities of endurance and patience and human brotherhood in the face of terrors and unimaginable depths of human suffering. His writings also witness the central paradox of a Holocaust literature. On the one hand, he has written this in his work, and I'd like to just read a couple of these pages that he has taken, of course, from his own experience of the. I'm sorry, of the. That's all right. It's just I have to speak louder this way. I mean, for the audience. Oh, okay. I'm sorry. In his work, he has written this. He says, perhaps 400 yards from the camp lay the potatoes, a treasure. Extremely long ditches full of potatoes and covered by alternate layers of soil and straw to protect them from the cold. Nobody would die of hunger anymore. But to extract them was by no means easy work. The cold had made the surface of the earth as hard as iron. By strenuous work with a pickaxe, it was possible to break the crust and lay bare the deposit. But the majority preferred to work the holes abandoned by others and continue to deepen them, passing the potatoes to their companions outside. An old Hungarian prized there by death. He lay there like hunger personified, head and shoulders under a pile of earth, belly in the snow, hands stretched out towards the potatoes. Someone came later and moved the body about a yard, so freeing the whole. A little farther on, he writes, I went in there one morning to try and borrow a needle. A patient was wheezing in one of the upper bunks. He heard me, struggled to sit up, then fell dangling, head over the edge toward me with his chest and arms stiff and his eyes white. The man in the bunk below automatically stretched up his arms to support the body and then realized that he was dead. He slowly withdrew from under the weight of the body, and the body slid to the ground, where it remained. Nobody knew his name. On the other hand, he has written this as well. We became aware, writes Primo Levi, that our language lacks words to express this offense, the demolition of man. Every serious writer approaching the Holocaust sooner or later says much the same. If there is a way of coping with this difficulty, it lies in a muted tactfulness, recognizing that there are some things that can be said and some that cannot. Primo Levi, born 1919, died April 11, 1987. Now, when I was first approached to deliver this lecture on Holocaust literature, I was sort of told, or it was suggested, that I do an overview, that is, of the novels, the poems, the drama, everything. It seems that that has been written on the Holocaust. It seemed like a formidable task, and I try to do as I'm asked. Found a statement in a book by Alvin Rosenfeld called "A Double Dying," and says that there is in existence a vast body of Holocaust literature which has now grown so large as to be beyond the reach of mastery. So I said, well, since it's beyond the reach of mastery, I can withdraw into a slightly narrower subject and perhaps do it some justice in the hour and so 20 or 30 minutes that I have for this for this presentation. Now, that was written in me. And since then, the literature has grown even more vast as the means of presentation have been exploited to convey this essential historical moment. And we normally think, let's say, of works like this magnificent film that was on TV last night and the night before, Shoah, put together or photographed and so on by Lanzmann. We normally think of it like that, or novels, something like Sophie's Choice, or other works of that sort. The Pawnbroker, Leon Uris's Mila 18, John Hershey's The Wall, that sort of work. And there has been, of course, a good deal of the Holocaust material presented in those forms. But quite by accident, the other day, I heard a section of a record by Whoopi Goldberg, who did a piece on her visit to Anne Frank's secret annex in Amsterdam. It was a very, very heartfelt piece. She talks about how she went in there and just somehow began crying in the presence of Anne Frank's home, where she wrote her book, and from which she was taken to suffer the martyrdom in Bergen-Belsen. I also ran across in a bookstore at UCLA a children's book called "I Am a Star: Child of the Holocaust" by a woman named Inga Auerbacher, done in 1986. I didn't have time to read it. But then I ran across another title of a children's book called "When Hitler Stole Pink Rabbit," and I began to get a little concerned about the sort of material that was being written. I didn't read that either. I hadn't seen it, and I don't think I'll look it up. Maybe just for curiosity's sake, I'll try to dip into it. But the title seems to be its own critique. Now, this sort of thing raises a problem. There is a good deal of material being written about the Holocaust because it's plainly speaking, it's a hot subject. There are all kinds of books and films and what have you. written on the subject, and a good deal of it, as is suggested by When Hitler Stole Pink Rabbit, tends to trivialize the whole matter. Apparently, the book was written as an introduction to the Holocaust for children. It was said it was better to introduce them to it in that way rather than to sort of just march them into Yad Vashem. So perhaps it does have some value, but it seems on the face of it a tendency to trivialization, whatever its motives. Now, all of this material is written, novels and poems and plays and so on, written in the face of admonitions articulated long ago and currently about the barbarity of writing Holocaust literature. And let me read some of these admonitions in a response to a poem by Celan. Theodor Adorno wrote this: "After Auschwitz," wrote Adorno, "to write a poem is barbaric. It means to squeeze aesthetic pleasure out of artistic representation, of the naked bodily pain of those who have been knocked down by rifle butts. Through aesthetic principles of stylization, the unimaginable ordeal still appears as if it had some ulterior purpose. It is transfigured and stripped of some of its horror, and with this, injustice is already done to the victims." Now, the poem he had in mind was a very serious piece called Todesfuge, Fugue of Death, and let me read a little bit of it to you. It is very lyrical. It is very potent. It does deal with the. It's a presentation of the scene in Auschwitz and its meaning. He says, "Coal black milk of morning, we drink it at sundown. We drink it at noon, and at dawning we drink it at night, and we drink it and drink. We'll shovel a grave in the heavens. There's no crowding there. A man's in the house. He plays with his serpents. He writes back home when the dark comes, your golden hair, Margareta. He writes it and then leaves the house, and the stars are a twinkle. He whistles his dogs to come near. He whistles his Jews to come here and shovel a grave in the earth. He commands us, play sweet now for dancing." There is a lyricism in that. There is, I suppose, a kind of pleasure one can derive from its and it is against this kind of possibility that Adorno writes, because to make something like that, like what occurred in Auschwitz, into literature is to, well, I suppose, beautify it. At least this is what was his fear. Another admonition, this time by Aaron Zeitlin, a Yiddish poet, writes this. He says, "Were Jeremiah to sit by the ashes of Israel today, he would not cry out a lamentation. The Almighty himself would be powerful in his well of tears. He would maintain a deep silence, for even an outcry is now a lie. Even tears are mere literature. Even prayers are false." And following this, an author named Peter Ravitch, whose novel Blood from the Sky is probably one of the better novels dealing with the Holocaust, has this to say: "The literary manner is an obscenity. There is the art, occasionally remunerative, of rummaging in vomit. And yet it would appear one has to write, so as to trick loneliness, so as to trick other people." Elie Wiesel, himself one of the most significant writers of the Holocaust, has this to say about this problem of writing. In an article which is collected in this book called "Confronting the Holocaust," edited by Alvin Rosenfeld and Eliezer Greenberg, he says this. He says, "No, I do not understand. And if I write, it is to warn the reader that he will not understand either. You will not understand. You will never understand. Were the words heard during the reign of night. I can only echo them. You who never lived under a sky of blood will never know what it was like. Even if you read all the books ever written, even if you listen to all the testimonies ever given, you will remain on this side of the wall. You will view the agony and death of a people from afar, through the screen of a memory that is not your own. And that presents the problem. So under these circumstances, why does he write? He says this, "They you, for they cannot do otherwise. When man in his grief falls silent," Goethe says, "then God gives him the strength to sing of his sorrows. From that moment on, he may no longer choose not to sing, whether his song is heard or not. What matters is to struggle against silence with words, or through another form of silence. What matters is to gather a smile here and there, a tear here and there, a word here and there, and thus justify the faith placed in you a long time ago by so many victims. Why I write? To wrench those victims from oblivion, to help the dead vanquish death." Now, this notion of the impossibility of writing about horrors is not new to the critics of Holocaust literature and the writers of Holocaust literature. We have statements from Claude Lanzmann, who made Shoah. He said about the film The Holocaust, that TV docudrama, I guess you call it something like that. He says, when they show the gas chambers, they show something too glamorous. Lanzmann is adamant that fiction is a poor way to show this. Now, in Christopher Marlowe's, in Joseph Conrad's Heart of Darkness, his narrator, Marlowe, says this in his attempt to try and describe his own experiences in what he calls the heart of darkness, this plunging into the center of Africa to meet the man, Kurtz, who has in his moral idealism, or has done a reverse in his moralism, to try, in his attempt to go to Africa and try to help the natives there, come up to the standards of European culture. He turns on it. He does a reverse, and across his article, in which he articulates these ideals of human improvement, he writes, "Exterminate all the brutes." When Marlowe confronts this kind of nihilism, when he confronts this kind of aggression, he says, "Oh, it is impossible. It is impossible to convey the life sensation of any given epoch of one's existence, that which makes its truth, its meaning, its subtle and penetrating essence. It is impossible. We live as we dream alone." So that it is not a new problem for writers to try to convey that which cannot be conveyed in language that is let's say, an incomplete instrument. What is Zohar? When Israel is in exile, so is the word. So that we find our writers with the anguish of trying to convey something, and at the same time knowing that they have an instrument incapable of conveying what it is they feel in their hearts, what it is they know in their minds. Now, literature traditionally has embodied the promise of redemption. We can look at older literature. I was looking at a poem myself, in my class in 17th century literature, a poem by John Milton called Lycidas, which is a confrontation with death, with young death. And it finally is a poem of consolation. Look homeward, angel, now, and melt with ruth, and O ye dolphins, waft the hapless youth. And the vision there of transcendence. There is a vision of salvation. This is what we normally expect from what we have in Western culture, expected from our literature. Redemption, consolation, meaning, catharsis, a sense of being at one with the universe around us. But the problem arises, you say, what redemption that these writers articulating says, what redemption can literature offer us for a historical situation where members of the Gestapo first murder children and then throw their bodies to wild animals in a zoo to be eaten? This is only, as I say, just one of countless incidents of a barbarity that is unprecedented in human history. Okay, but and along with these admonitions, there has been a pointing out, in fact, of that material that does, in fact, trivialize in various ways. Lena Wertmuller's Seven Beauties has been attacked by a number of people. Sophie's Choice, and the card I just read a minute ago, or the statement I just read by Lanzmann, dealing with that TV docudrama Holocaust. These works are attempts at a serious presentation, but somehow the manner of their presentation, the way in which they deal with material, Sophie's Choice especially, the critics find tend to universalize the Holocaust and consequently trivialize it. However, despite these serious and deeply felt cautions, people are compelled to tell their story. Or is this witness or impulse to witness something that is new to the consciousness of mankind? New. It is not something that we have, that has developed as a result of the Holocaust. There is something within us, apparently, some way of relating, ourselves to the world that makes witnessing a very essential kind of activity, and we find it in the Bible, in the book of Joel. We read this: "The word of the Lord that came to Joel the son of Pethuel, hear this, ye old men, and give ear, all ye inhabitants of the land. Hath this been in your days, or even in the days of your fathers? Tell ye your children of it, and let your children tell their children, and their children another generation. That which the palmer worm hath left, hath the locust eaten, and that which the locust hath left, hath the cankerworm eaten, and that which the cankerworm hath left, hath the caterpillar eaten. Awake, ye drunkards, and weep, and wail, all ye drinkers of wine, because of the new wine, for it is cut off from your mouth. For a nation is come up upon my land, strong and without number, whose teeth are the teeth of a lion, and he hath the cheek teeth of a grin. He hath laid my vine waste, and barked my fig tree. He hath made it completely bare, and cast it away. Its branches are made white." And perhaps one of the most poignant pleas for remembrance in Western literature comes from Shakespeare's Hamlet. Hamlet is dying, and he says, and this seems to this particular quote plea seems to embody emotionally that which the victim feels must be done. He says, "O God, Horatio, what a wounded name! Things standing thus unknown shall live behind me. If thou didst ever hold me in thy heart, absent thee from felicity a while, and in this harsh world draw thy breath in pain to tell my story." And the Baal Shem Tov has writ, "Redemption lies in remembering." And again, back to Hamlet, the ghost of his father pleading with him, "Remember me," is repeated. It seems the echo of that request, that very deep request, "Remember me," is repeated in the anguished writings and pleas of those who fell victims to Nazi brutality. Now, Elie Wiesel has also written that Greek culture brought forth the tragedy. Roman culture, the epistle, the Renaissance. So our era of totalitarianism and mass murder has brought forth the literature of testimony. But even here, in regarding the literature of witnesses, that is, memoirs, diarists, people who had lived through the horror, there is something of a skepticism expressed by some of our very strong critics. Let me give you one example, a quote which I've been, from an article from which I've been looking at by Irving Howe. You might want to read this. It's in the New Republic of October 27, 1986, and it is a central article in the piece, and it is called "Writing and the Holocaust." He has this to say about the memoirs, about the people who went through the experience. He says, But isn't there a skeptical voice may interject a touch of empiricist naivete in such high claims for Holocaust memoirs? Memory can be treacherous among people who have suffered terribly and must feel a measure of guilt at being alive at all. Nor can we be sure of the truth supplied by damaged and overwrought witnesses, for whatever knowledge we may claim about these matters is likely to come in the very memoirs we find ourselves submitting, however uneasily, to critical judgment. The skeptical voice is cogent, and I would only say in reply that we are not helpless before the accumulated mass of recollection. Our awe before the suffering and our respect for the sufferers does not disable us from making discriminations of value, tone, authority. There remain the usual historical tests, both through external check and internal comparison. And there is still that indispensable, the reader's ear, bending toward credence or doubt. The test of the ear is a delicate and perilous one, entailing a shift from testimony to witness, a shift that, except perhaps with regard to the scrappiest of chronicles, seems unavoidable. Reading Holocaust memoirs, we respond not just to their accounts of what happened, we respond also to qualities of being, tremors of sensibility, as these emerge even from the bloodiest pages. We respond to the or boastfulness, the candor or evasiveness, the self-effacement or self-promotion of the writers. We respond most of all to a quality that might be called moral poise, by which I mean a readiness to engage in a complete reckoning with the past, insofar as there can be one, a strength of remembrance that leads the writer into despair, and then perhaps a little beyond it, so that he does not flinch from anything, neither shame nor degradation, yet refuses to indulge in the bursts of self-pity, sometimes sliding into self-aggrandizement, that understandably mar a fair number of Holocaust memoirs. But is there not something shameful in subjecting the work of survivors to this kind of scrutiny? Perhaps so, yet in choosing to become writers, they have no choice but to accept this burden. The Holocaust was structured to destroy the very idea of private being. It was a consequence of events entirely out there in the objective world, the world of force and power. Yet in Holocaust memoirs and reaffirm their value as evidence, we find ourselves veering less by choice than necessity from the brute external to the fragile subjective, from matter to voice, from story to storyteller. And this leaves us profoundly uneasy, signifying that our earlier stress upon the value of testimony has now been complicated, perhaps even compromised by the introduction of aesthetic considerations. We may wish with all our hearts to yield entirely to the demands of memory and evidence, but simply by virtue of reading, we cannot forget that the diarist was a person formed before the memoirist, and a memoirist a person formed after the Holocaust. We are ensnared in the cruelty of remembering, a compounded cruelty in which our need for truthful testimony lures us into tests of authenticity. Just a little more on this. He says, we are trapped. Our need for testimony that will forever place the Holocaust squarely within history require to respond to voice, nuance, personality. Our desire to see the Holocaust in weightier terms than the merely aesthetic lures us into a shy recognition of the moral reverberations of the aesthetic. This does not make us happy, but the only alternative is the silence we all remember now and then to praise. So we have to view this voice of skepticism, that is presented here, admonishes us, warns us, to even that which is considered historical, even that which is considered the outpourings of a suffering human being, with some kind of skepticism, because somehow the retelling of this material might romanticize it, might change it. You see, and the important thing is to know it, to try and know it for what it was, or as what Irving is suggesting here, what Irvinghow is suggesting here, is that we regard the Holocaust almost as a kind of taboo subject. That is, we should do something of a how shall I say, historical study into it. But somehow, when we get involved in writing stories about it, when we get involved in to recount these events in a storytelling mode, we should sort of be wary of it and sort of treat the material, treat the event historically for certain, but as something of a taboo subject. But getting back, but getting back to what El said, that is the development of a literature of witnessing. We have a new genre, a new way of dealing with it, and for all its, again, we're dealing with a paradox here. For all its faults and pitfalls and a kind of skirting of the problem, or not dealing with it as completely as we would like it to be dealt with, to prevent trivializing. We still have it. See, and literature of witnessing is not new either. To go back to the Heart of Darkness, it's almost a kind of 19th century Holocaust piece. I don't want to. I'm just sort of saying that by way of, I'm very skeptical about using the Holocaust as a metaphor for anything. Again, we have been warned by writers like Cynthia Ozick, and this is the problem with some of the literature on the Holocaust. It is seen as a metaphor for something, a metaphor of man's inhumanity to man, for example. But they regard the Holocaust, and we should regard the Holocaust as not a metaphor for anything. You see, it is itself. It is a horror that has its own identity and should not be seen as a means of describing something else, because that something else must necessarily be less than, must be less serious, must be less horrible, must be less a way of articulating what went on in the Second World War. And but with the Heart of Darkness, we have a literature, a story that witnesses the horror that can result from the kind of nihilism that we find characteristic of the Nazi era. We find the horror that can result from the will to power that Kurtz exercises in the middle of Africa there, and our Nalo is even somewhat drawn to it. He finds a kind of attraction in this exercise of power, but and the horror that it creates, but is almost naturally regarded as resisting the impulse to go in that way. It's just not him. So we have that, and in the works of Franz Kafka, which shows the individual in a world where external determinations have become so crushing that internal motivations weigh nothing. We have the human as victim. We see this can be seen as something of a precursor literature, a literature witnessing the condition, the modern condition of mankind that was fully realized in Holocaust. Now, in Philip Roth's novel *The Ghostwriter*, he has something to say about that. He makes that connection. He says, "Oh yes," referring to Anne Frank. "Oh yes, she was a marvelous young writer. She was something for 13. It's like watching an accelerated film of a fetus sprouting a face, watching her mastering things. You must read it. Suddenly she's discovering reflection. Suddenly there's portraiture, character sketches. Suddenly there's a long, intricate, eventful happening so beautifully recounted it seems to have gone through a dozen drafts. And no poisonous notion of being interesting or serious. She just is. My whole body was damp from the effort of compressing my thoughts and presenting them to her before Lonoff returned to inhibit me. The ardor in her, the spirit in her, always on the move, always starting things, being boring as unbearable to her as being bored. A terrific writer, really, and an enormously appealing child, I was thinking. The thought just occurred to me, of course, in the rapture of praising Anne Frank to one who might even be her. She's like some impassioned little sister of Kafka's, his lost little daughter. A kinship is even there in the face, I think. Kafka's garrets and closets, the hidden attics where they hand down the indictments, the camouflaged doors. Everything he dreamed in Prague was to her real Amsterdam life. What he invented, she suffered. Do you remember the first sentence of the trial? We were talking about it last night, Mr. Lonoff and myself. It could be the epigraph for her. Someone must have falsely traduced Anne F., because one morning, without having done anything wrong, she was placed under arrest. Another writer I ran across who can be seen as a precursor of witness literature is a very interesting historical novelist, I guess. His name is Lion Furtwängler, and he was an exile from Nazi Germany and spent the remaining years of his life here in California in the German community that existed down in Pacific Palisades, along with Thomas Mann and other writers and intellectuals and so on, who fled Nazi Germany. And in a book of his called The Oppermans, it's a family. It was written in it was published in 1934, and recounts or deals with the events that were taking place in Nazi Germany at the end of 1932 and the beginning of 1933, when Hitler came into power. Its main character, a man by the name of Gustav Oppermann, is the member of a wealthy Jewish family who are in, well, let's sort of upper middle class, I guess, who are in the furniture business. That is the Oppermans, and they're very small. They have a number of branches. Their furniture is cheap and good. It is somehow mass produced. But nevertheless, the kind of furniture that the people want, and as a result, they're very successful. So that Gustav Oppermann, as a member of the family, has access to a great deal of money, and he becomes something of a dilettante. He doesn't work. He writes. He enjoys food. He has mistresses. He has a lovely home, and so on and so forth. As events move along, Hitler comes into power in January of 1933, and everything starts changing. Of course, the concentration camp Dachau was put into operation, and people who were not politically okay, or who were political opponents, or who were Jews, were sent there for a kind of re-education. and Gustav escapes into Switzerland, and he's as useless as ever, even more useless than ever, because he can't even write his books. He can't even do what he'd been doing all along. And he gets the impulse to go back, and that is into Germany, and he's picked up and he's put into Dachau, and for a whole year, and he suffers tremendously. And after the year, he has gotten out through influence and so on, and his suffering makes him a witness of what is going on in the concentration camp. He is a witness to his own Judaism. He becomes somehow a reversal takes place, and he affirms his Judaism in this witnessing the suffering that these early victims were going through. Now, witness literature of the Holocaust period, and books written after the liberation in this genre, that is, memoirs and even novels, which give the impression of being documentary accounts, such as John Hershey's The Wall and Leon Uris's Mila 18, take on the appearance of factual accounts of what happened in the ghettos and in the death camps. You know that both The Wall and Mila 18 have narrators who are that is, the fiction created is that they are survivors, you see, and that the novel, the Wall and Mila 18, are their accounts of what they lived through. Now, there again, to repeat, there are many books in this genre, the literature of testimony or the literature of witnessing, which seems to be a factual account. And here we have to keep Irving Howe's caution in mind, because a closer look shows that the articulation of this factual material is in fact literary. We find dialogue, we find characterization, we find this pun is awful, but we find selection. That is, certain details are selected over others. That is, the way in which a writer would put together a short story or a novel. You don't put everything down. You select the significant material and try to get, and by this lie, by this fiction, try to get at the truth. But we have dialogue, characterization, selection, narrative, suspense, images, refrain, irony, and of course description and thematic development. It's as though literary modes naturally form the means for conveying the deeply felt experiences being exposed. That it's almost impossible, and people who were not writers before, people who became writers because of their experience in articulating their own experiences, have become writers. They seem almost naturally to pick up on the methods of literature, and it is not the kind of objective reporting, dispassionate, uninvolved, that that Irving Howe would like this material to be, but rather an accounting that is literary in its texture. That's Elsa Morante's book on the Holocaust in Italy. Nicely captures this tendency, and the title of that work is History, a Novel. Elie Wiesel's Night is considered a memoir. In that bibliography that I ran off for you, it is listed under the section of memoirs. It is considered a memoir, not a fiction, but it could just as easily have been classified as a Bildungsroman, a portrait of the artist as a young man. What is unique in this work is the experience of the young boy, not the form in which it is presented. So that we have the young boy, if you're familiar with that work, rounded up, his town, he's he's rounded up with his family, his father, pushed into those horrible trains, dragged to, taken to Auschwitz, and he's just about to be, thrown into a pit, a fire. He's about to be destroyed in that way, and at the very last moment, he is diverted, and he is and he becomes, and he survives the total ordeal, and he's with his father. Another characteristic of the Bildungsroman, the story of the young person growing up, the connection that the protagonist has with his elders, with the various authorities. Again, the quote education he gets, is one that no other main character in a Bildungsroman has gotten, but it is the education of a young man, and we can see that one of the ways, from the example of this particular novel memoir, we can see one of the characteristics of the literature of witness is, in fact, its use of older literary forms, conventional literary forms of realism, but done in such a way as to make that which is conventional, that which is forms that we're used to, new. That is this material, and the need to convey it in a striking, significant, meaningful, intense manner has transformed these conventional forms into vehicles for the presentation of these horrible truths. As again, we always have to keep the caution, the paradox in mind, as limited as these presentations might be. Now, when you look at this Holocaust material in some detail, that is the literature of testimony, you find that their motifs, their images, which emerge from this work, assume the power of myth and archetype. That is, no one writer, and I think this is the way to read it, rather than treat it as a taboo subject, we have to be critical and so on, as Irving Howe says. He is, after all, one of our major literary critics, not only of Holocaust material, but of American literature and European literature and so on. He's quite a strong voice and someone to be dismissed lightly. But no one, as it turns out, my own experience with this material has brought this home to me, that no one book captures, in relating these events, however skillfully done, captures the meaning or the quality of this kind of experience. But somehow, when you take them all together, when you read it as a body of literature, you see, then it assumes a different kind of meaning, different kind of power. Much in the same way, if I can go back to that poem by Milton that I mentioned earlier, it is one thing to read Milton's Lycidas, or it is one thing to read Milton's Paradise Lost. But when you read Milton's Paradise Lost in the context of Homer, in the context of Dante, in the context of Virgil and all of the other writers of the epic, or when you read his Lycidas in the context of the ancient literature and Renaissance and so on, the meaning and power and the value of any one articulation of those themes assumes a different identity. It becomes stronger. It becomes more potent. It becomes more vivid. In other words, what we're looking at here in Holocaust witness literature is something of a context, a kind of history of a literature given to us in a very short time, of having to witness before one's life is over. Okay, so we have these images, and I'd like to list some of them, just to give you an idea. And I might say a very small idea of what it is that these writers cover. The painful inevitability of the Shoah, of the annihilation. When you read about people, even of course the ones who of course well, not all of them, are survivors, the ones who did survive. When you read about their experiences, you know that they survived. And in the course of reading, you sort of hope. You're always hoping that somehow things will change in the course of reading. Say, well, maybe it wasn't so bad after all. Maybe this person survived. Maybe the concentration camp, maybe this, maybe that. Maybe the Germans will change their mind and so on and so forth, or change their heart. At least this is what you want to happen because what is being presented is so awful. But it always comes down on you that it happened. It happened in its way. And the inevitability of the annihilation is inescapable. And it's a very painful, very traumatic kind of realization or experience that we have in reading this material. Okay, we have the courageous, very courageous, but doomed resistance. That is in the Warsaw Ghetto and Sobibor, at these in Auschwitz itself. Some of these memoirs recount that and say, "My God, isn't this wonderful?" It turns out that the resistance in the Warsaw Ghetto in 1943 was the first such armed resistance against the Nazis in the course of that horrible war. I say, isn't that wonderful? Aren't these people? Isn't this marvelous? Maybe they can work something out, defeat these sons of bitches, and experience the kind of liberation and freedom and life that they deserve. But it never happens. They're always defeated. They're always machine gunned, or if they escape a concentration camp, they're hunted down by right-wing type partisans, in the forest, and destroyed there. Then we have the images of starvation in the ghettos and in the death camps, mass death, suicide, starvation, death as the result of just the whim of some Nazi with a gun. In the death camps, there are the selections, the silence before and the silence after, the terrible waiting to see whether or not you will be selected to be killed. There are the children who are annihilated, who are destroyed first, without any quarter. If you're beneath a certain age, you must die. You see. If you're at an age, as Elie Wiesel was, he was allowed to live so he could do this work. He survived. Of course, most didn't. The horrible image of the roll call. Let me give you an example of that daily institution in the prison camp. This is from Charlotte Delbo's book, None of Us Will Return. She writes, roll call, the SS in black cloaks have passed. They have counted. We wait some more. We wait for days, the next day. Since the day before, the morrow, since the middle of the night, today, we wait. Day is breaking. We wait for day because we must wait for something. We do not wait for death. It waits for us. We do not wait for anything. We wait for what happens. Night because it follows day. Day because it follows night. We wait for the end of the roll call. The end of the roll call is the blast of a whistle that makes each woman turn around toward the gate. Motionless ranks become ranks ready to begin the march. The march to the marshes, to the bricks, to the ditches. Today we wait longer than usual. The sky is paler than usual. We wait. What? An SS appears at the end of the Lagerstrasse, comes toward us, stops in front of our ranks. By the caduceus on his cap, he must be the doctor. He looks us over, slowly. He speaks. He does not scream. He speaks. A question. No one answers. He calls. Interpreter! Marie-Claude comes forward. The SS repeats his question, and Marie-Claude translates. He is there any among us who cannot endure the roll call. The SS watches us. Magda, Oblakova, who is standing next to him, watches us and moving a bit to the side, blinks slightly. Who in fact can endure the roll call? Who can stand motionless for hours, in the middle of night, in the snow, without having eaten, slept? Who can withstand this cold for hours? Some raise their hands. The SS has them step out of the ranks, counts them. Too few. Softly he utters another sentence and Marie-Claude translates again. He is asking whether there aren't any others, elderly or sick, who find the roll call too hard in the morning. Other hands go up. Then Magda quickly nudges Marie-Claude, and Marie-Claude, without changing her tone, but it is better not to say so. The hands that have been raised are lowered, all but one. A little old woman, quite tiny, who raises herself up, stretching and waving her arm as high as she can, afraid that they will not see her. The SS moves on. The old woman speaks up. "I, sir, I am 67 years old." Her neighbors shush her. She gets angry. Why would they stop her if there is a less harsh routine for the sick and the aged? Why would they stop her from taking advantage of this? In despair at having been forgotten, she cries out. In a shrill voice as aged as herself, she cries out, "Me, sir, I'm 67 years old." The SS hears, turns around, "Come," and she joins the group just now, which the SS doctor escorts to Block 25. Magda had been in the camp for a year. She knew. Now, that is another image. Of course, you go to Block 25, and you die a horrible death. See, this is where the women who were about to be exterminated were placed. No food, no water, nothing. And they waited their turn for extermination, starving, dying of thirst, going mad with hunger and thirst, and absolutely nothing. Just that is the until they were finally gassed. And this is another image we find in the literature of witness. That is Block 25. There is the image of Mengele, the man who conducted experiments, the man who stood at the ramp. Another important image in this literature of witness, the ramp that the Dune people got onto out of the trains. He would stand there and direct people and left. Some were strong enough to work. They were spared for a while. The others, of course, went to the gas chamber. And Mengele himself appears in the play by Ralph Huck, who's called The Deputy, as the very incarnation of evil, a very incarnation of evil that has defeated God. He does all of his things in that play, commits all of his atrocities, presents us with this image of total nihilism, and nothing happens to him. Nothing happens. God doesn't strike him down. See, and he wins. See, and this is how he has been taken up in this very important play. Okay, so we have, in addition, we have the trains, the rain, the cold, the mud, the ramp, Block 25, the smoke and stench of burning bodies. We also have certain stories of, certain events that occur in the concentration camps in Auschwitz that get repeated by various authors. And this is a very interesting development. The story, for example, of the death of Schillinger, which is a piece of heroism by a woman who is about to be exterminated, and somehow she is, in one version, she is asked to dance, and she's naked in another version, and this German soldier wants to in some way get involved with her sexually, or wants her to dance. As I say, different versions in different accounts, and she somehow gets a hold of his gun and kills him. You see, in one version, she throws some dirt into his eyes. In another version, she just grabs the gun out of his holster, and so on. But the thing there is that this has happened. Different people have seen it, you see, tell it or have heard about it, tell it in different ways. Now, is this to be discounted because it is not historically accurate, or are we to regard it, you see, as a story told in various ways, but which tells us something of a deeper truth about the human, about the human spirit under extremity? This woman did not want to be humiliated. She did not want to be destroyed without taking, without this kind of revenge. Somehow got her hands on a gun, shot the man. Does it matter, as I say, to repeat, does it matter that it's done one way in one, or its details are different in a second or a third version? Then there is the couple, Mala and Edik, the couple who tried to escape from Auschwitz. In Fania Fenelon's book, Playing for Time, we have an account of them, and she presents them in very heroic and very glowing terms. They became our Romeo and Juliet. They became symbols for our hope of freedom. And of course, these two are caught quite soon after they escape, and in some versions, they are, in her version, I think they are hanged but in other versions, the man Edik tries to hang himself before they can, before the Nazis can humiliate him, and somehow Mala is not hanged; she's just sort of beaten to death. They try to get some information out of her about the escape, and she holds out. And then there is finally, in my list anyhow, there is the liberation by the Allied troops, a very poignant moment in the literature of witness, when these people who, had they been in Bergen-Belsen or in Buchenwald, had they been subjected to the torture and neglect and starvation and whatnot for another few days, a week, perhaps another 24 hours, would have died. See? And what happens is that the Allied troops come in and they are saved. So this is a very poignant moment, but at the same time, it is not, there is freedom, there is liberation, they can live now, but it is somehow a very painful kind of experience that we are exposed to. And the variety of presentations is in fact, emphasizes that kind of poignancy. Somehow it all happened, quite a bit too late. Now, these images, taken together from a variety of sources, they form myths in a collective consciousness which have a specific identity and emotional power. Collectively, they form a myth of the end of human history and meaning and value, the death of the idea of man. Now, one can look at this and regard it as as a new genre, a way of writing about a moment in human history that is this witnessing kind of literature, and come up with a different kind of literature. You see, let me read a statement about this, better articulated than I seem to be managing here. Danilo Kiss, who was a Yugoslavian writer, and some of his colleagues who from Eastern Europe, who are, although they not always write about or include the Holocaust in their work, of course, are writing in the shadow of the Holocaust. And for Kiss, the literature of documentation, as he calls it, involves researching actual events, changing them and rearranging them until they become infused with the imaginative energy of art. In that way, life becomes inspired by literature, he says, and the real events of history, either true or false, depending upon who has recorded them, are given power and meaning. Now, I see my time is almost up. I wanted to do a little reading from some of these works, but I have done some already to just to give you an idea of how different writers treat the material, and it seems to me, far from trivializing it. That is, when it's done well, when it's done seriously, and when the writer somehow is inspired by the material, inspired by his need or her need to witness, when it is done well, it has a great deal of power, because it exists. I think it exists in the kind of literature like it, on the same themes, with the same kinds of vision. You see, that have the same kind of meaning, or have the same kind of identity and quality as it's sort of a collective piece of literature, almost a kind of epic that is written not by one person, or written by a lot of people. Perhaps there will be an author who will come around, and this is indicated in some of the criticism of Holocaust literature. Perhaps there will be an author who comes around who can sort of put all this material together and create another Paradise Lost, or create another Iliad, and in fact articulate for us this new consciousness of the death idea of man. Okay, so again, if I can go back to Charlotte Delbo's book, if I can go back to Charlotte Delbo's book, there is a particular scene here where she describes a dog killing a woman. The woman advances. It is as if she were obeying an order. In front of the SS, she stops. Her back is wrapped with convulsions, her hunched back with the shoulder blades protruding beneath her yellow coat. The SS holds his dog. Did he give an order, make a sign? The dog pounces on the woman without growling, without snarling, without barking. It is as silent as a dream. The dog pounces on the woman, sinks its teeth into her throat, and we do not move, stuck in a viscous substance that prevents us from making even a gesture as in a dream. The woman screams, a wrenched-out scream, a single scream that rends the immobility of the plane. We do not know if the cry comes from her or from us, from her torn throat or from ours. I feel the teeth of the dog at my throat. I shriek. Not a sound comes out of me. The silence of a dream. Now we have in Fania Fenelon's book something on that same image. One of the women in the orchestra comes back. She says, in the barracks, she says, I can't bear to look at them. I can't bear their eyes. Fania, the dogs ate 2 of them today. They were going to piss or get a bite of ice to suck. The SS set their dogs on them. They tore them into little bits. And those bastards forced their comrades to go and pick them up and put them on a pile of dead bodies. And I saw them. Pieces of women's flesh turned into dog's meat. They carried them as best as they could on their backs. And we went on playing, belting out that rubbish. Butchers with lumps of meat on their shoulders. They could hardly carry it. They were exhausted. And we were forcing them to march. And there was such hatred in the eyes of those women. I can't bear it anymore. I won't go. And a little farther on down, Fania says, never had I so appreciated being spared that particular duty. At that time, the perverse SS mind had not yet been inspired to add a singer to the pseudo fanfare. And she is happy, you see, as a witness to be spared that, being deeply involved. And her book tends to show her as withdrawn. She did an instrument, rather she arranged the music for the Auschwitz orchestra, the orchestra that marched people to work, marched people to their deaths, and so on. Whereas Charlotte Delbo has seen the thing, she confronts it, you see. Now, which is a more accurate or more authentic account? You see, perhaps we shouldn't ask that question. And of course, when you look at Fenelon's book, you wonder, she herself didn't write it. She wrote it with somebody after years. And perhaps there is a tendency there to romanticize herself. But is it less, taken together, is her account perhaps less authentic or less an eyewitness? Is it not to be considered, you see, in this totality of Holocaust witness literature? I think it should be considered, even though we might be skeptical about it. Now, one other example, I'd like to play a little bit of Verdi's Requiem. Now, in the Theresienstadt, or in the Terezin ghetto concentration camp, where there were gathered all kinds of people with talent, writers and musicians, singers and pianists and composers and so on. We had what happened there was a performance. El Schachter, the conductor, put together a performance of Verdi's Requiem, and it was done so well they were asked to perform it before the SS, before Eichmann. They didn't want to, but yet they felt that somehow their performance, the music, might move them to relent. It was a kind of hope they had, and they put on a shortened version of the Requiem, and this is one of the parts they sang, the Lacrimosa, which is a lamentation. Now that was followed by the Libera Me, the conclusion of the Verdi Requiem, which is a cry for liberty. I wanted to play that, but I just don't have it. We just don't have the time. But let me read what this account of this, what Joseph Bohr in this book called the Teretzin Requiem, which is considered a novel. Somehow Raphael Schachter was criticized for performing the thing, in front of the Nazis, for putting the whole thing on, and Joseph Bohr's book is called a novel, which, according to what I've been indicating here, is not a term of praise. But this is what he says. The last roll of the timpani had ebbed away. The footlights outlined the conductor's figure sharply as he stood erect, his back turned upon his audience. Nothing stirred, only the curtain slowly closed. Eichmann sat crouched deep in his armchair, and strange thoughts tossed and eddied in his brain, as strange as the music that had called them up. Interesting, very interesting, he observed to Moise. Unique. I've never before heard such a performance of the Requiem, Moise agreed. Eichmann applauded, not too lavishly since the artists were Jews, not too faintly, for the had certainly been unique, and praise was due to the camp commandant, too, for the exemplary arrangements. Eichmann was applauding, and that was a signal for the SS. Applause rang through the hall. Out before the curtain stepped the Jewish elder, thin and pale, and bowed deeply. The summer drew to its close, and the time of the transports began again. The command had promised that Schachter's company would not be separated. The promise was kept. All together they ascended into the first wagons of the first transport. Well, you see this sort of treachery, you see this sort of duplicity is characteristic of the experience that we are confronted with here. And as I say, it is a very painful, one at a time, and altogether even more so. But it does present us very powerfully with, I think, with the truth of that time. Now the question that we ask under these circumstances, can literature recover its historical value? That is, as a means of redemption, as a means of consolation, as a means of finding value in a world that has witnessed events that put all of those values very seriously into question. I'd like to answer that question, if I can, from now, with a piece of a poem written by W.H. Auden, commemorating the death or memorializing the death of William Butler Yeats, who died in 1939, right in the middle of the Nazi era. And he says in his lament, he says, "In the nightmare of the dark, all the dogs of Europe bark, and the living nations wail, each sequestered, and the living nations wait, each in its hate. Intellectual disgrace stares from every human face, and the seas of pity lie locked and frozen in each eye. Follow, poet, follow right to the bottom of the night. With your unconstraining voice, still persuade us to rejoice. With the farming of a verse, make a vineyard of the curse. Sing of human unsuccess in a rapture of distress. In the deserts of the heart, let the healing fountain start. In the prison of his days, teach the free man how to." Thank you. Am I supposed to entertain questions? Am I supposed to entertain questions now, John, or do you have a different, what as they say these days, an agenda? Okay. Are there any questions? Yes. Yes. focuses. Yes, I can see why you would say that, and in addition to this body of criticism, this body of literature that has developed over the years since 1945, has also developed a body of criticism, you see, which has its points of view and has its judgment, you see. And as far as Sophie's Choice is concerned, the hostile criticism toward it thinks of it being altered, in some way trivializing by universalizing the Holocaust, by taking it out of its specifically Jewish context, you see. And no, because of the way the commandant was treated, a man with compassion and who somehow he was, there he was, a person torn by his duty on the one hand and feeling. In other words, what we have in the literature of witness is and in our knowledge of what went on there is a totally different picture, you see. And what happens is that the Holocaust or Auschwitz becomes a metaphor for man's inhumanity to man, you see. And pity the poor perpetrator, he is also a victim. See, this is the kind of criticism they make of it. And regard it as inferior for that reason. As far as the doc is concerned, it was very clean. It was very sanitary. And you're right. It brought home the facts, some of the facts of what went on there, but in such a way as to rob them of their identity. At least this is what some critics have to say. And when you have a body of literature like this, you are going to naturally there's going to naturally develop people who comment on it, because the act of criticism itself is an attempt to determine meaning and this goes on all the time, not only in Holocaust literature, but all literature and art and music and so on. So not everybody agrees about this. I'm just indicated that this is something of a problem with those particular works. As part of this general problem they see about making literature out of the Holocaust, making literature out of the Holocaust has become for them something of a general problem. Yes, Beverly? Yeah. Okay, well, it's got as far as I'm concerned. Well, I haven't read it, so I can't. It has an unfortunate title. That's all. What can I say? Yeah. Okay. I can't disagree. I haven't read it, but the title itself is a kind of when Hitler stole Pink Rabbit. It's like when the Grinch stole Christmas. I mean, that's what it becomes associated with. Ken. Yeah. Yes, yes.
How can you really understand the full environment unless you see from the other different equations?
Yes. Well, if you see, if you look at show, if you saw Shoah on TV these past 2 nights, Nazis who were questioned were in fact, they exonerated themselves. They denied knowing and this and that, and
yeah. Literature that really, objection denied from today's hour.
Yeah.
But in terms of their day-to-day relationships and what they were doing, is there a literature from the SS or the
Yes. Yes, the head of Auschwitz wrote about what was his name? Hoss wrote a book in which he, right before he was executed, in which he sort of blames everybody else and exonerates himself. It is something of this kind of testimony is something of an inauthentic. Pardon? What? Yeah. Yes. Yeah, there is, again, I'm not as familiar with that material as with this, but what I do know, it does have something of that identity, so that the testimony of people who were there, people who visited on Shoah last night. You remember there was some testimony from Jan Karski. He visited Belzec, as they pronounce it. And his account in his book is absolutely devastating. There is no, it is what we have come to understand of the nightmare world of Auschwitz, the world of the concentration camp, as somehow part of history, but so different from what has what had occurred before that, as to set it off as having happened on a different planet, in a different world at a different time, outside of anything that can be called human, and anything other than a presentation of that experience in that way would in some way be a belying of it. Would in some way try to cover it up. You see, I suppose you can point to certain things. Can be pointed to certain things in the concentration camp. Say, well, it wasn't so bad. Borowski talks about there being a puff, in Auschwitz, with prostitutes and so on. Very ironically, he talks about Auschwitz, our home, and regards it as a place where where he's had to learn to exist. You see, not being Jewish, he wasn't threatened as much as the Jews were, but a human being can get used to anything, But it has to be taken ironically. I think it has to be seen ironically. Otherwise, it would be another falsification, even though his experience wasn't as devastating as others in the camp, with whom, incidentally, he identifies and feels very guilty about. Yeah. Yes. Yeah. No, what I'm suggesting, or what Irving Howe has suggested, and what Cynthia Ozick has suggested in their attempts to regard that as not a metaphor for anything else, is that it's itself. You see, any attempt to compare it to something else, some other kind of human horror, as we find in the newspapers these days, every time something happens here or there, they say, well, it's just like the Holocaust, or the Jews are behaving in Israel the way the Nazis behaved. It is. You see, to use the Holocaust in that way is to in some way trivialize it. You see, is to make it something other than it was. And what we have to, and literature, in its anguished attempt to, in this writing, what it is to sit down and write the record or the testimony of these horrible experiences. Again, in Shoah, if I can point to that, you have people who recounting things that happened over 40 years ago break down. They just can't stand thinking about it, and they break down. See, so to say that this historical moment is really a metaphor for something else, you see, is to reduce its genuine meaning as a time, as a structure of events that has that have shown mankind to be, or elements of mankind to be capable of these horrors. You see, what else do you want it to what else do you want it to mean? Is a question. Yes, John. Yes.
And I think that's exactly right, because different rules will apply to the two different groups. Because the one group which
Well, it seems to me that the material is written if we call it a literature of witnessing or a literature of telling my story. It is for future generations. It is for people who haven't gone through this, so that they should know about it. Now, the important thing, I suppose, is to know about it in an authentic way, you see, and not just not just any old way. That there was this terrible thing that happened between 1939 or between 1933 and 1945, and this happened and that happened, and there were lots of murders in concentration camps and so on, and gassing. It seems to me that the manner of telling, the manner of presentation, trying to present it as authentically as possible, is a very important consideration in the transmission of this knowledge. You see, to say that this happened and that happened, one can say it and make it sound as though it's just another episode of man's inhumanity to man, similar to what happened in the First World War, similar to what happened in the 100 Years' War. The important thing about the Holocaust is that nothing has ever happened. Nothing before has ever like it has ever happened before. You see, and that's how it has to be understood. Not in let's say the context of man's inhumanity to man, because that puts it on the same level of other atrocities. And there have been plenty in the history of humanity, which literature has dealt with successfully, which mankind has in some way incorporated, into its sense of human history and all the rest of it. This is a different kind of consciousness, a new consciousness, an event or a series of events that is different in quality, different in degree, different in lots of ways from anything that has occurred before it. And this is what the literature tries to bear testimony to. See, so it has to be known, certainly. It has to be known by people who didn't live through it, but it has to be known as it was, and not as something like something else. You see.
Well, you just said it.
Yeah.
I was trying to say before, which is why Sophie's choice in the docudrama wouldn't do it. I mean, if the goal is just to bring the general notion to the attention of the people, then the comic strip probably would be the best way to go. But then, would you go that far? So, I'm sure that probably very much fewer, quite a bit fewer people watch the two parts of the docudrama. Like, what does that mean? Does that mean that the docudrama was better? Was valid? I thought it was completely invalid. And I watched the show. I could have watched another 10 or 20 hours of it. And I was appalled almost by the degree of, by the lack of attention that the media gave that event. Here you have 10 hours of what I thought was the best documentary I've ever seen. And I've seen a lot and I've done a lot. And yet hardly anything said about it. But when they play Shoah and Sophie's Choice comes on the screen, the print media is just jumping up and down. But is that what we want? Is that what we want to do? Just to say, hey, it happened? No, I absolutely agree with you. The authenticity of the experience is important
You see, because facts do undergo changes, do change in the light of how they're presented. See, this is one of the interesting things about this quote factual material that I've been presenting here, is that it is literary. I mean, it is presented in such a way, as I say, with dialogue, with thematic development, with conflict, and so on and so forth, like a novel, like a short story. Marcel? with the Holocaust film, so you have an image of normality. Then these problems occur, and then the the death, the difficulties, the resistance, and then the formation of the state of Israel. It's a very neat kind of package, you see, and as such is very uplifting. Shoah itself is not uplifting. All those hours of watching and looking, it does have. It's almost like, I suppose, a kind of epic that these earlier writers have been looking for. Somehow it keeps going back to the monument of Treblinka. It keeps going back to the gate at Auschwitz. It keeps going back. The camera keeps photographing certain very important images. Almost like the images and motifs and myths that I pulled out here. It does that kind of job, you see, and taken together, we get a very strong sense, and the testimony, we get a very strong sense of what happened. But we don't have to quote the Zohar. There are many other writers who understood the how should I say, the insufficiency of their instrument, words or film or what have you, of dealing with a particular human reality. That quote from Joseph Conrad is only one of many. Language, from any number of points of view, a Christian one, a Jewish one, a Kabbalistic one, what have you, is seen as a fallen instrument. Is seen as a something that is created by fallen mankind. See, someone who has lost touch with God, with the world of spirit, and that a weak attempt. That is the language that we have. A weak attempt to articulate that which is most meaningful to humanity is in fact, as successful as it is doomed to failure because of the nature of the medium itself. Yes. Yes. Perhaps it will. I mean, a number of the retellers of the story will in fact do to it what's being done even now. But there are always, this is where criticism comes in. There are always the authentic artists, the people who are not unwilling to look at something devastating straight in the face, the way Charlotte Delbo was. She looked at it straight in the face. She saw it, and herself expressed the horror of turning it into a story. She had to find that instrument, a kind of prose poetry, for presenting it in all its starkness and horror, and she's very successful. It's a very important book. It's a very important work of Holocaust literature. But will this sort of thing be undermined, trivial? Yes, it will be. Will it be, say, romanticized? It has been romanticized. But there will always be writers, you see, the ones who we consider great, the ones who we consider classics, who will not be afraid to look this horrible reality in the face and deal with it as writers have been dealing with the horrors of human experience from the Trojan War, well, to go back to Homer, to the present. Yes, sir. Well, choose your human horror. I mean, what is it? Which one do you favor? The carnage of the First World War, the atomic bomb. Which one do you want? Yeah. Yes. Well, let me read from. Let me read Irving Howe's explanation of this. He says, no absolute division of kind existed between concentration and death camps, and some, like the grouping of Auschwitz, contained both quarters for slave laborers and gas chambers, with recurrent selections from the former feeding the latter. Still, the distinction between the two varieties of camps has some descriptive and analytic value. It enables us to distinguish between what was and was not historically unique about the Holocaust. Whatever was unique took place in the death camps, forming a sequence of events radically different from all previous butcheries in the history of mankind. Revenge, enslavement, dispersion, large-scale slaughter of enemies, all are a commonplace of the past. But the physical elimination of a organized segment of mankind was, both as idea and fact, new. The destruction of Europe's Jews, Claude Lanzmann has written, cannot be logically deduced from any system of presuppositions between the conditions that permitted extermination and the extermination itself. The fact of the extermination, there is a break in continuity, a hiatus, an abyss, unquote. That abyss forms the essence of the Holocaust. So what we're looking at historical events that seem to fight by man's inhumanity to man, desire for territory, desire for power, some sort of thing that we can, some sort of motivation that can be understood. When we look at the Holocaust, when we look at what happened in the death camps, it's beyond comprehension. Absolutely beyond comprehension. Or at least this has become the prevailing a way in which people have come to regard this. And this sort of, pardon?
The banality of evil.
Yes, what Hannah Arendt called the banality of evil. You see, there is something qualitatively different about it, unmotivated, that is politically totally unnecessary. Not even unnecessary politically, but as it turns out, it impeded the Nazi war effort to get involved in this annihilation of the Jews, and for those people to for the SS to go to various countries like Greece and search out a bunch of Jews here and a town there and 50,000 in Salonika, and then torment them and drive them to Auschwitz and so on, where they annihilate them. It doesn't seem, there's no reason for it, or there's no fact of past human history that can say, well, it was like this. They did it because that's what Genghis Khan did, for the same reason, or some such motivation. And in that separation, according to this definition, this is where the Holocaust lies. See? Yes, ma'am. You mean written by whom? Who might be the writer of such a thing? I'm not familiar with any. John is, yeah. Well, what was brought out in the trials, in the Nuremberg trials, and in the film clips and so on, was this fact, of what was done. The Germans say, or at least what I understand, is that the people as a whole were not aware of what was going on, weren't aware of the degree of the inhumanity there. And I met some people in Spain who were Germans. It was on vacation, and they said that they were educated in school. It was part of the process of their education to be introduced to these films that were taken in the concentration camps. And they had to make a commitment. They said they were given a choice. Do you want to see it or not to see it? But once they were in the room, they had to stay. They couldn't leave in the middle. And so those who chose to stay were exposed to this kind of thing. Yes, there was an attempt to educate. And again, what can you do? Could a historian justify this? You see, no, apparently not. All you can do is present it. And as such, it has something of an educational value. If I suppose one can regard this as an apology, I suppose one can regard compensation money as a kind of apology. One can regard, let's say, the attempt to in some way deal with the past as an apology. But how can you apologize? What can you say? In terms of a mitigating statement. Yes, ma'am. Yes. Yes, one of the characteristics of present German historiography is to try and fit the whole thing into some kind of vision or sense of German historical development. You see, of the history of Germany, and make it. See, this is part of the trivialization, to make it part of the dynamics of German history. You see, but that would in some way there would have to be some kind of subduing and trivializing or undermining of these facts too horrible to contemplate. Yes, sir.
The chroniclers of the future
Yeah.
that we're talking about will have to deal with something that the chronicles of the recent past and the present didn't have to deal with.
What's that?
TV cameras, technology. She spoke about the writing down of the Exodus,
Mhm.
which is what we have to deal with. You know, this was a human interpretation of the events that occurred and was presented with us, romanticized, and that's what we got.
Yeah, but you see, I'm sorry.
What I'm trying to say is when the right you want to write something about, they have to deal with
The pictures. You mean what we have? Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. It's very important. It's very important historical material. But if you look at the Exodus, you see, the Exodus has assumed a kind of religious meaning, and there are theologians dealing with this with the Holocaust, and are trying in some way to bring it in line with Jewish theology and so on. But if Exodus, if you look at slavery, I mean these are sort of commonplace human events: slavery, exile, population dispersion. You know, it's been happening. You know, sometimes it happens voluntarily, sometimes not so voluntarily. But the important fact of the Holocaust is that it's never happened like that before. You see. I suppose the only thing worse could be total annihilation. You know, the atomic conclusion to all of this. But we do have film documentaries. We have a kind of material that prevents us from, in fact, making of the Holocaust what has been made of other human disaster. Yes, I.
A quick response to your question about the intellectual community apologizing with a good example probably of what may happen, which is an ugly backlash in a way, is when Rolf Hoffert wrote his deputy, in which he acted German, and I think Catholics do, in which he accused the church and just simply the Pope of not doing much.
Of being collaborators, yes.
Right, and he was subjected to quite a bit of harassment and abuse because of it.
Yes.
And it was fiction.
Are we finished? Okay. Thank you very much. Yes.
Dying. Why is it that in the very last chapter does Freud say to her, there are lower rings of
I read it a long time ago. If I remember correctly, there was a transcendence. There was a translation. But they weren't all washed clean. They were all sort of made.
right.
Yeah. Right. And as I said, I don't remember.
Why would the author put in that statement? Why not stop with the Holocaust? And secondly, why
Well, you see, that's part of my having this.
not totally?
Well, it is. You see, the Holocaust of Baba Yar in this case was so very. See, again, what we're supposed to understand is that these historical events have something to do with the psychological scar that she was experiencing through her life, and that it was so bad that it is not totally redeemable. And that there were people before this whole there were people who were saved. But you see, their Baba Yar is wife
as a whole person on the right, never exist.
Yeah.
Like a contribution maybe to
Well, again, I say I haven't read it in a long time, but it is there is a salvation. There is a vision of salvation.
But why is it such a right that you were writing it?
After such knowledge, well, I didn't give it. You didn't give it out. I gave a bibliography to Deputy Zimmer, Bishop Zimmer, and he didn't pass it out.